Thank you for that, Ryan. We appreciate your content. Looking forward to talking with you and working with you in the future. Thank you for all of you who are joining us in this security automation and security platform discussion. We're going to be talking about SOAR, Security Orchestration and Automated Response. And we're going to be covering some of the details about how to actually get a SOAR program up and running, things to look for in any SOAR platform, and giving you a little bit of data that supports the concept that security automation needs to be a part of any cybersecurity program moving forward. So thank you for joining us. My name is Stephen Aiello. I'm the Security and Compliance Practice Director here at AHEAD. I specifically lead the delivery arm of our organization. To give you a little bit of structure, we are going to address all of the questions at the end of the session, but we will be happy to answer all of your questions. And again, thank you for attending. I'm going to get right into the content here. So to give you a little bit of background about us in AHEAD security practice, we have sort of three guiding principles that we live by. One, and if you recognize who this gentleman is on the screen, you might know that he doesn't work at AHEAD. It's a gentleman named Bruce Schneier. And over 20 years ago now, in the year 2000, Bruce Schneier wrote a really great article, and it was talking about the proliferation of security products and specifically the vulnerabilities in security products. And there was one line in that blog post that Bruce wrote that really stood out to me. And it said, security is a process, not a product. And at AHEAD, we really have taken that as one of our core values in our integrated security practice. There's a whole host of products and tools and offerings in the market, and sometimes it can be confusing. But it's much, much better to have solid cybersecurity processes and a moderate product than have no processes than the best product on the face of the planet. So we really help organizations define their processes, understand how to improve them. And this is particularly important for security automation. It is effectively impossible to automate a process that doesn't exist. And so we're going to talk about how critically important this is as we go through this. Many organizations in the news will keep cybersecurity events, right, in forefront of mind. But another sort of pillar that we have in our practice is we really align our goals and outcomes to the specific threat actions that have been proven to take place in almost every single data breach. If you read like the Verizon data breach incident report or the Cisco cybersecurity report, the FireEye, M-Trends, there's a couple of things that happen in almost every single data breach. And everybody knows what those things are. Say email phish, right? Some vulnerable application that was exploited. That's generally how the actors get in. Then there's installation of command and control. The actor gets persistence in your environment. You've got capture of credentials, lateral movement, and then ultimately the actor will authenticate to data or a service using those stolen credentials, and then they'll either exfiltrate your data, they'll steal it, or they'll hold it for ransom. So, there's always some new crazy technology, AI, ML, but we really like to try to focus on stopping the core and fundamental attacks that are proven to occur in over 99% of data breaches. And then finally, we noticed that with other engineering disciplines like manufacturing or electrical engineering, that there was a high emphasis or strong emphasis on quality of outcomes. So you might think in manufacturing, ISO 9000 or Six Sigma, 1 defect per million. And we weren't seeing that same level of rigor be applied to cybersecurity engineering. And so we really try to help organizations try to understand, are they getting the results from their processes or from their activities that they're, seeking? And if not, why? And we've discovered that there's a couple of things that could be causing a deviation in an organization not getting the outcomes from their activities that they're looking for. One, they don't have processes well defined. So it sort of circles back, right? Everything is ad hoc, if you will. Two, some organizations are just understaffed. And it's very, very hard to find good cybersecurity talent today. So people can just be, organizations can just be understaffed and can present a very large challenge. So that gives you a little, high-level overview of our cybersecurity practice, and specifically how our core pillars play into our conversations today. So the challenge, right? If we're talking about security automation, if we're automating something, there's likely to be a challenge that needs to be solved. So what are we trying to solve? And I figured I would share this. This is a true, having a conversation with a customer, and these were some data points that they shared with us. They said, we are dealing with 25,000 events per second. They had implemented security automation, and they were performing 2,500 automated investigations per day. And out of those 2,500 automated investigations per day, they were opening 25 tickets. Now, that's a tremendous amount of data to be looking at and a tremendous amount of investigations to look at. So they had the benefit of using security automation. But what if they didn't have an automation platform? Well, if you're thinking about 2,500 tickets a day, and you're thinking, in our team, we were responsible for internal security up until somewhat recently. If it takes an analyst about 60 to 90 minutes to do a thorough investigation, that's 3,125 work hours created every day. Now, this organization had a team of 12. And so for that team of 12, they were generating 10.8 24-hour workdays every day. So this problem of investigating so much data and investigating so many incidents by hand is almost impossible. And that's why security automation is so critical. For every new technology that you bring into the environment, that's providing you a new data source. But what's really important is how you're using that data source to protect the environment. And so if we dive into or we dig into these actions a little bit more, the average security analyst might have to do all of these things. Well, they're getting the event source from somewhere. Maybe it's your EDR solution, your firewall solution. Maybe they're taking some data from those solutions and they're doing a reputation lookup, whether it's a file hash or a DNS URL, an IP address. Maybe they're using a tool like VirusTotal. Then they might go over and pivot into their SIM and then query all the firewall rules that have been triggered for this particular asset. And then they're going to start to pull together evidence. Maybe look at Windows registry keys, doing a memory dump, running a check on processes. And then if you're operating in the public cloud, it becomes even more complex because you can't do or use some of the tools that you were used to using in a VMware environment. And then you still have to document that whole event. And so when you think about all of that work that an analyst has to do for one investigation, and you then start to think about all the events that analysts have to look at a day, you can quickly see that number, right, that 3,100 plus hours of work being generated every day, it's just unmanageable from a human perspective. And so the real question is how do you make this more manageable from a security operations perspective? Well, security automation is the answer, right? Now, the real question is how do we take this sort of industry buzzword of security automation and turn it into something meaningful, right? There's a lot of buzzwords out there. There's a lot of hot new technology. But what we wanted to help organizations understand as a result of this conversation is really understand how to take that concept and put it into place. So we're going to cover some of the tactical things that you need to be thinking about as you're building out a security automation program. Now, this is going to get a little bit nerdy. And if you have any sort of background in programming, you'll probably be familiar with CRUD verbs. And CRUD stands for create, read, update, delete. And this is critically important because it actually has a lot to do with some of the technologies that you're going to need to make sure that you have in your environment. So what are some examples of this? When you think about a create action, maybe you want to be able to automatically via an API go into your firewall and create a new firewall rule. right? Maybe you want to be able to go into your EDR solution and read all of the alerts or read all of the processes that are running on your endpoint and bring all of that data in. But reading and creating are fine, specifically reading, but you really need to be able to have that the update. If you can't go into that same EDR solution and, let's say, isolate that asset off the network, well, you can read and you might be able to create a new endpoint or something like that. But if you can't change the state of the endpoint, then you can't really protect the environment. And then finally, you might want to clean up after yourself and delete some old capabilities. So these CRUD verbs are critically important. And the reason why we learned this is when we were investing in trying to build out our security automation practice, we realized that there wasn't a whole lot of training available. So we ended up just going and finding developers and training them in security. And we learned this by working with our developers. They said, we really need this whole range of options available in any product set that we are being asked to integrate with. So any vendor, if you have a security automation strategy, whether it's your EDR solution, whether it's your firewall solution, you should be asking your vendor, what APIs do you have available? Not just if you have an API. This is a really nuanced discussion. So you might say to an EDR vendor, do you have an API? And they'll go, yes, we do. But can you only read reports from that API? If you can only read reports, or if you can only do very trivial things, then that product, that platform is not going to bode well for you if you have a strategy for security automation. So if you have anybody in your organization that's familiar with programming, API-based programming, they make really great candidates to help you boost and bolster your security automation initiative. And just as a side note, generally the language of choice for all of these platforms is Python. So, all right. So when you're actually thinking about a security automation platform, and AHEAD is familiar with almost all of the major platforms. And there's a lot of platforms out there. Several have been picked up by major vendors within the last few years. And AHEAD generally has been working with these platforms since most of their acquisitions. And so there's a couple of things over the last 2 or 3 years that we've really identified what makes a good SOAR platform. It's not how well the sales guy presents the platform to you. You want to be asking specific questions. So, do you have pre-built integrations for your dependencies? And we'll get to what a dependency is in a moment. But this is a critical question, especially for one of the major players on the market. Do you have pre-built integrations for my dependencies? Do your pre-built integrations provide all of those CRUD operations that we just spoke about? Create, read, update, delete. It's not very beneficial to use a SOAR platform just to pull some reports. So it's really important to understand, if you're looking at a SOAR platform, if you're looking at a SOAR vendor, do they have these proper integrations based on the CRUD verbs for all of your integrations? Another really important question is, how difficult is it to create my own custom integration? Do they have sample code? Can you open their playbooks? Can you copy their playbooks and then edit and just add or remove the pieces in functionality that you need? If you can't do that, it's a pretty big red flag, because it means that you're going to be limited to the native capabilities of your security automation platform. And at the end of the day, if you're really trying to drive economic value and reduce your total cost of operations of your cybersecurity team, you're going to need somebody who understands how to write a little bit of Python and can tinker and adjust these integrations that are provided for you. Another really important question to ask is, how easy is it for our guy or gal that knows Python to just drop in their code? Many of these organizations online, like VirusTotal, TextRaiser, things like that, they have great APIs that are available. And quite frankly, it's simple to learn how to code against an API. It might take you 1 or 2 workdays to figure out how to leverage these APIs, if you have any sort of concept of development at all. And so, you really want to understand the level of effort that it takes for somebody on your team to write a piece of Python code, generally in some cases JavaScript, and just drop it into the SOAR platform and get it to execute in a pipeline. If they can't answer that question, and if they can't demonstrate that capability to you, that's another significant red flag. The next bullet point, it starts to dive into, again, creating custom playbooks. It's really important for you to understand, how does the SOAR platform present debugging information? Again, sort of tying back to how a developer would think. There's one of the major platforms out there, and our team was working on it, and there was an error, right? And these are people that literally have computer science degrees, and there was an error, there was no debug log, it said, error, please contact your administrator. The person was the administrator. There was nothing in the error that allowed them to debug what was going on in the playbook. Again, critically important if you have a person or two that understands Python and is going to want to write their own code. To that, another really important point is training. This is one of the major differentiators that we've seen in the market. I would absolutely, without question, ask your sales rep, provide me with a list of the complete training for your platform or product. And if they can't provide you with an absolute fantastic list, more than just, hey, we're going to teach you how to set up the product, then it's a red flag, right? There should be training on how to set up the platform, how to use the existing integrations, how to create custom integrations, and how to do some advanced development in the platform. And those are all things that are critically important. Imagine buying, anything, an HVAC system, and there's no, I guess that's pretty simple. Imagine buying something really complicated, and there's no instruction manual to it. And what we found is that some of the major players are really lacking in their education and training. And we've had customers that have purchased these products against our recommendations and then come back to us and said, man, it's so difficult to try to figure out how to do anything in the platform because the training is just not available. It's critically important that you ask that for the success of your team. And then finally, this really helps jumpstart. Does the SOAR platform provide you with a templated code base, right, to create your own integrations? Do they have some of their integrations up on GitHub so you can look at that code? Do they have sample integrations for you to just take and run with, report generation, things like that? So any SOAR vendor that you're talking to, make sure you answer or get these questions answered from them to 100% level of satisfaction that you're happy with. It will save you, even if there's, a 10, 20% delta in the cost of the platform, if you can get these questions answered, it's going to save you so much time and money on the back end. And we've been working with most of these platforms for 3 or 4 years. We know them very well. And if you have any questions about this, we're more than happy to answer them at the end. This is really critical information. Now, in the beginning, we asked this question, do you have pre-built integrations for all of my dependencies? So what are those dependencies? What are some of the things that you might be thinking of, and why is it important to build out those integrations? So that could be anything in your environment. It could be something like VMware. Do you want to be able to stop a virtual machine, disconnect the network of a virtual machine? That's a very powerful feature, specifically when we think about ransomware. If you have a ransomware indicator that comes in from your EDR solution, if you don't have the ability to go via a programmatic API and isolate that virtual machine with your EDR solution, then you might have to go talk to your VMware cluster and just say disconnect, NIC in VMware. Same thing if you have a VDI environment. You don't want that to spread. Do you have CrowdStrike? Do you have Carbon Black? Whatever that may be. And making sure that you're documenting all of these integrations becomes critically important. And again, there are major players in the market that will say they have these programmatic APIs. Unfortunately, Microsoft is seriously guilty of this. If you look at like their Defender platform, there are certain things you can only do within their GUI, or you can only run some reports via an API. So, right from the beginning, it's critically important that you inventory all of those integrations. I would canvass your organization to make sure if there's firewalls, there's NAC solutions, your ticketing system is a big one. At Ahead, we do a lot of work with ServiceNow. We're very fortunate. ServiceNow has a fantastic API that we integrate with all the time. But it's really, really important right from the beginning, at the onset of your project, to make sure that you're gathering all of these integration points for the success and to validate that you can have all of those CRUD verbs executed on your platforms. So based on sort of all of this education, when Ahead works with organizations, to help them build out a security automation strategy or roadmap, they want to deploy something, or even if you want to take this on yourself, this is sort of at a very, very high level how we recommend that folks execute. One, we do a thing called a feasibility study. A lot of times organizations will come to us and they'll say, we have to do security automation. We understand we're not getting an additional headcount. We're going to grow through acquisition. We have to, move towards security automation. But then what happens is we'll come in and we'll talk to the customer about what tools and technology that they have in that environment. And we'll review those current state processes. And we find that processes aren't defined. One security analyst might investigate an incident in one way. A second security analyst might investigate an incident a second way. And there's no commonality. So if you're going to really drive down a security automation strategy, you need to make sure that all of your processes are aligned. And I would start off with something simple like email phishing is generally a really low-hanging fruit type of use case. What are you going to look at? Okay, we're going to get the email. We're going to look at the domain that sent us the email. When was the domain registered, right? It could be a newly registered domain. What's the reputation of the domain? Where was the domain registered geographically, right? So all of those things, you might say, okay, we look at the domain. Let's look at the headers of the email. Then we're going to look at the context of the body of the email. We're going to actually take a look at the email and see if there's any indicators that the email has been translated from another language. There's artifacts that you can look for in that process. So email is a relatively simple, good, strong value that people can automate and can generally get behind a process to document that process. Then you could move to something a little bit more complex like incident response, right? So understanding how those processes are documented and how they're working in the environment is critically important. As I mentioned, you really need to take that tools asset inventory. Any tools that you own or that are owned by a third party. And again, doing that whole CRUD verb analysis. As I may mention, organizations will say, we have to do security automation, but then we start looking at the assets and the tools that they own, and the APIs just don't exist. And so then you have a decision to make. You can say, well, when do these contracts end, right? When does your contract end on your endpoint system that doesn't have an API to execute against? Or, when does your ESM tool, when does that contract end because there's no API available to you? It's legacy or homegrown. So you really have to technically understand if what the organization is trying to do is even possible. And it makes a huge, huge difference. Finally, you have to interview your various stakeholders, understand how they deal with third party. In some cases, you might have an application that is supported by a third party. You don't have the right to do or not do certain things to that application, else it'll take you out of maintenance, things like that. And so then you also want to finally, once you have this knowledge, you want to understand what are your goals and objectives, right? And do that gap assessment. Can we meet our goals and objectives based on the information that we have? So that's the current state assessment. And then once you have that done, right, and digging into that tools assessment, then you start looking at, well, how easy is it to integrate with this API? Do you have the skills to do that, right? And then from a skills perspective, say, all right, well, if this is where we're at today, where do we need to be tomorrow? And then you can make some recommendations on training. We might need to send somebody for a 2 or 3 day simple Python skills class, something like that, and identify those candidates that are excited to do that. And then from, you have the people, you have the technology, how do you create the logical design, right? Maybe you're going to make some updates to your tools and vendors. Maybe you're going to get rid of an EDR solution that doesn't have solid APIs. But you're going to need to diagram all of those interconnections, ports, protocols that need to be open. You're going to need to start logically designing the runbooks, right? All of the reporting capabilities. Who do you want to receive the alerts and the notifications? What are the SLAs that you want these integrations to have? Those things are all very, very critical, and they're all a part of what we call a feasibility study. So whether a head is doing this for you as a partner or you want to do these things your own as you're building out the security automation program in your company, these are all critical things. These steps should not be skipped. So finally, once you understand what is possible based on your technology, based on your skill set, based on the SLAs, then we generally roll into something that's called an automation factory. We would recommend only after you understand the results of the feasibility study that you even deploy the SOAR platform and you even start thinking about building simple playbooks. Then once you have simple playbooks based on the pre-existing integrations and you have those working well, maybe you've got a nice reporting integration coming in from Office 365. You want to make sure that there's no new email box forwarding rules. It's a nice, simple integration. That could be an indicator of compromise if you see unauthorized forwarding rules. Then you could start to build into some more advanced custom integrations. And instead of using the pre-built integrations, you start coding and developing directly against those APIs for things like VirusTotal or TextRaiser or Joe's Sandbox, any of those little things that you might want to do to enhance. And then finally, from a reporting perspective and analysis perspective, then you can actually start to take action in your environment. Most organizations that we see today, the whole investigative process is automated, and then there's a ticket that is opened in ServiceNow or some other ticketing platform, but there's still a button somewhere where somebody's looking at it and saying, yeah, I've looked at all of this data, the complete forensics investigation has been done, based on all of this investigation, quarantine the asset, or no, this is a false positive. But after you gain enough confidence in your investigative processes and in your security automation process, then once you get comfortable there, if you've identified those assets, then you can start taking automated response. It's a more advanced step in the security automation lifecycle, but it is absolutely possible to do. So, in summary, I think one of the most important things that you can remember about a head and about security automation is that security is not a product; it's a process, right? And you can't automate something that you don't have a well-defined process for. Identify what those goals are. What are your biggest pain points? We had a customer, very, very large healthcare organization, and they stated that they were investigating dozens of email phishing tickets a day, and every one was taking them 30 minutes to an hour. That is not a productive use of a human being's time. You can absolutely automate that process. So create and identify those biggest pain points. Once you have those pain points identify to see if your goals are even technically feasible with the platforms that you have. And again, don't forget the CRUD verbs: create, read, update, delete. It's so, so important that your security tool stack provides you those capabilities via some sort of API, hopefully RESTful. And then finally, once you have that all in place, then and only then do you execute that design and build out that logical environment. So hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully this gives you a deeper sort of set of criteria if you're thinking about security automation, if you're thinking about purchasing one of these products, if you're thinking about evaluating new technology for your organization, and you're thinking about a security automation strategy. What we will do now is we will take some questions and answers. What do you got?
All right, so hopefully it's helpful. I see we have a first question that came in from Richard, and the question was, I see you mentioned Python as a SOAR scripting language of choice. Why not PowerShell? It's cross-platform, no need for NuGet, etc. Why Python over PowerShell? So I think this is an excellent question. And quite frankly, I am not a huge fan of Python, although some people on my team probably skewer me for that. I came up learning C and C Sharp, and so I like brackets. I don't particularly care for Python. The reason for that skill set is that almost every major SOAR platform has a Python-based engine. So it's really important to understand how to work with the security automation engine. And this is something that I think is really critical and will lead to our second question. It would be like saying, well, why should I learn JavaScript if you're not if you're developing in ServiceNow? Just almost all of the actions and playbooks and examples within all of the major platforms are written in Python. So I actually personally do prefer PowerShell over Python. It's just, the reality of the world that almost all of these platforms have a Python backend. There is one of them that you can leverage JavaScript, but even that you're still going to have to know some Python. So it's not that I'm anti-PowerShell, it's just the industry is using Python in these platforms. You can call PowerShell like external PowerShell scripts, but the core SOAR engines are not making use of PowerShell in a meaningful way. So the second question is, and that's pretty important, is training. How do you train people up, or how do you get appropriate training? And this is pretty critical. What we've seen, there's huge differentiators, or there's a huge amount of difference in all of these platforms. Some of them have good training programs. There could be, a SOAR platform that you might not have heard before, but their training is absolutely excellent, and it provides all of the use cases that you might need. And then there's some other, major SOAR platforms out there where the training is just almost non-existent. And this is something that's critically important. These platforms, if you want to do very simple things, you might be able to get by with limited training. But if you want to really maximize the value of these platforms and really start to automate and really move the needle from a security automation perspective, it's really critical that you talk to whatever vendor that you're speaking to about their training options. And I would, for any vendor or that you're looking at, I would say, can you please send me your complete training curriculum? And if you are not seeing some development courses, if you only see one or two sort of high-level admin courses, I would advise sort of that you reconsider. We have worked with all of the major players out there, and there were some major players who the training was just very poor. And when you get into these platforms and you don't have guidance from the vendor on how to ingest new JSON data, how to parse that data, how to do it easily, it can be highly problematic for your team to maximize the value. So one of the design criteria, one of the product selection criteria that you should absolutely talk to your vendor about is, show me all of your training options for this platform and how deep do those training options go. That's another good consideration. One of the questions that we have is, what are some of the skills that you should be looking for in order to help develop or identify a security automation engineer? What we ended up having to do is we ended up hiring some folks with just a straight computer science background. And you don't need to be a rocket scientist when it comes to software development. But what I would say is somebody that has a decent background in programming, that fully understands how to interface with RESTful APIs. And so if you are looking to develop this capability internally as an organization, I would actually recommend that you start off looking at software developers. Again, Python, any object-oriented, platform. But that's one of the things that we had found was very beneficial and helpful for us, is just starting off with people that know how to develop. And then we taught them the security aspects. It was easier to teach them sort of what we wanted them to do from a security automation platform than to have to teach somebody how to develop in a competent manner. So, other questions? Okay, so I think that handles all the questions. Thank you very much. Just have a couple of wrap-up items out our sponsor booth in the main area, and please do fill out our survey. I believe there is a prize for filling out that survey. And then also, we are going to be done for the day. We will be back tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.